going to do another demo refactoring of the code from the recent assessment. So if you have not taken the assessment yet, I think that's only one of you. You should not watch this just yet. Otherwise, I'm going to try and do this as quickly as possible just to show you what a mechanical process it is. So we'll start with the code as it started, draws the snowman, isn't he jolly? And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this same refactoring over and over again, where I'm going to find a chunk of code and extract it to a function. So first thing, draw the background, draw the snowman. Those are two obviously different things. So I'm going to draw the background, and I will go ahead and name the function that I'm going to create. And I'll just put a placeholder here, draw background. And this time I'll go down to the bottom. So put the stuff below the code where I'm extracting it from. Create the function signature. Make sure all the code I just pasted is inside the body of that function. And now the thing I need to do is find all of the variables that are mentioned in this code that aren't defined in this code, which is basically all of them. And I'm actually going to go extreme on this. I'm going to, some of these are global, and so I don't actually need to take them as arguments. I'm just going to add them as arguments. So I'm going to say width, horizon, those are all the variables that we use. And that just means that then back where I called the function, I need to pass in width and horizon. So width is global. I could have left it out of both places and everything would still work. But maybe later I'll talk about why you might actually want to do this, even though it's global. But it certainly works just as well. So now we have a function that draws a background of a given width with a given horizon line. All right, now draw the snowman. It might be tempting to grab just like this much or this much up until the next thing, but if we look at it, draw the snowman consists of all these other parts. Draw the head, draw the hat, or draw the torso, draw the butt, and those each also consist of various parts. So if we want to grab all the code that draws the snowman to put in a function called draw the snowman, which I'll go ahead and here, I'll say draw snowman. Don't know what arguments it's going to take yet. I'm going to take all of the code that seems related to drawing the snowman, which is, as it turns out, all of the rest of the code in our original function. So I cut that, const draw snowman. Don't know what arguments it takes yet. There's all the code. And so now I've made a new function that's nearly as big as the original old function. And I need to do the same trick to find out what arguments I need to pass in. But on the other hand, the old function is now just 2 lines long, and it says exactly what it does. It draws a background, and it draws a snowman. So let's fix up these arguments. Again, I will add as arguments any variables that we reference without defining within this function. So x we define, but width we don't. Proportions we define. These are all defined. This is a syntax. I wrote it up on the board during the assessment. I've talked to many of you about it, but this is a way of defining these variables by taking apart this other array. All right, so total, proportions, a lot of variables here. They're all defined. Okay, base and size are new. Actually, size is here too. Okay, so base and size are used but not defined. And then, let's see, where did x? And x is defined inside here, so that's okay. I think that's maybe it. And the clue that we've got this right, so width, as we've said, is global. In the editor, base and size are grayed out because they are no longer used because we just cut out all the code that refers to them. So clearly we need to pass those back in. And since now looking at this main function, or draw picture function, there's no other variables to refer to. So it's possible there's some global variables that we didn't notice, but all of the variables that exist only in draw picture are now accounted for, unless draw snowman depends on horizon. But A, I'm pretty sure it doesn't. B, there's no reason it would. So indeed. Okay, so now we've extracted draw snowman. Draw snowman is still quite large, and it has a bunch of different parts. Draw the head, draw the eyes, draw the nose. But a lot of those are part of, you could break it up different ways, but I would think of it as drawing the head as drawing everything to do with the head. So the head, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and even the hat. So I'm going to grab all of that code, cut that, replace it with draw head, come down here, make a function called draw head, put the code in there, and now same trick. All right, what do we, head size is referred to, X is referred to. I'm going to pass that as the first argument. That's sort of saying where horizontally to put this snowman. Head Y, I'll put next because X and Y tend to go together. And probably that's all. Like what else, what other information would we need to draw the head? We need to know where it's positioned in the X axis and the Y axis, and we need to know how big it is. So I'm guessing that if I go up here, X, head, Y, and head size, this still works. Indeed. Okay, I'm going to do a quick thing here. In Draw Snowman, we have all these variables, head Y, torso Y, butt Y, and likewise for the size, because it was all in one function. Now that I have drawing the head as its own function, I don't need to say that it's the head Y, because that's kind of implied by the fact that we're drawing the head. So I'm going to rename this to Y, just because that's kind of a nicer name. And I'm going to rename head size to just size. So now we're drawing a head at a given XY of a given size. And I can even do the same thing with this local variable head radius and call it radius, or maybe even just R. I'll go with radius. Okay, so to draw the head, we draw some stuff. We draw the eyes, we draw the nose, we draw the mouth, we draw the hat. That is also crying out to be perhaps factored out. But first I'm going to grab the torso. So similarly to the head, the torso is not just the ball in the middle, but the buttons and the arms. So I want to grab all of this code, torso, and come down below draw head. And the same drill as before. And again, now we actually kind of get maybe this pattern. Is like, so we need to know what X, we need to know the Y, which is called torso Y, and we need to know the size of the torso. And that pretty much fully determines what the torso is going to look like. So we can come back up here, X, torso, Y, torso size, make sure that works. It does. And then I'm going to do the same thing, rename these symbols because I don't need the prefix to disambiguate, because within the context of this function, there's only one X, Y, and size. All right, and then the last one, drawing the butt. Draw butt. We can almost even guess it's going to be the same, right? It's going to need the X. It's going to use the butt Y and the butt size. So we've sort of observed the pattern. Const draw butt equals X, butt Y, butt size, and the code. And that works. Rename some symbols again. All right. So it's getting better. How do we draw a picture? We draw the background, we draw the snowman. How do we draw the background? We do a bunch of rectangles. How do we draw a snowman? We figure out a bunch of positions and sizes, and then we draw the head, we draw the torso, and draw the butt. And then the head is still a little bit complicated. It draws this like circle and filled circle, and then the eyes, and then the nose, and then the mouth, and then the hat. So I will just keep going. Same drill as before. The eyes are a piece. They don't go with any of the other pieces, so we can just take that out. I won't guess at what the arguments are going to be. And this time I'm going to put the new function right below this function that we're extracting it from. So it's a little easier to sort of read the chunks in order. And look at what we need. So this one, we're going to get passed in the radius, and we're going to get passed in an x and a y. Oops, there's the r in radius. Okay, and so x, y, radius. Eyes are still there. You can probably guess where this is going. Draw the nose. Let's draw a nose. It takes also an x and a y and a radius. This kind of makes sense. All the features of the face are designed to be a function of the size of the face. Draw a mouth. It's going to probably be the same, but we'll wait and see. Let's draw a mouth. Okay, this one's kind of complicated and hairy, but if we look at the variables that are not defined in this function, I is defined, dy is defined, x is not, radius is not, y is not. So same arguments, x, y, and radius. Put them up here, x, y, radius. And the last one, draw a hat. And this is another one that does a fair bit of computation just to set up some initial variables, but everything is determined by, it's positioned at the x, and the top is determined by the y and the radius. And we kind of know there can't be too much else that's getting passed in because there's just not that many other variables that exist in draw ahead. So it has x, y, and size, it computes the radius, and so now it has these 4 variables. So that's pretty much all we could possibly be passing in to any of the functions we call anyway. So that should do that. Hat's still there. Okay, cool. Now we can go to the torso, which has some subcomponents. It has a function, or it has a chunk that draws the arms. And again, unsurprisingly, the variables seem to be the x and the y and the radius. This is obviously the radius of the torso, not of the head, because we're getting called from torso. And draw the buttons. I'm going to go ahead and guess it's probably the same, because what else could it be? And if I get it wrong, the editor would help me. Like, let's just say there was no reference to radius here, so I'll just make it. Or let's say I said there was also going to be an argument named foo. Well, there's no reference to foo in the code. We can tell this is grayed out. So it's okay to guess a little bit and then let the editor help you figure out. But this indeed, x, y, and radius are all referred to. Doesn't look like there's any missing ones. Again, there hardly could be. All right, and now I guess I'm going to look at draw arms. draw arms has some internal duplication. Basically sets up some stuff and draws a line, and then sets up some other stuff and draws a line, and they look very similar. Like the draw line is actually the same, like this line and this line are the same. And then the only difference are the x1 and x2 get set slightly differently. This one has multiplied by -1, and this one has not multiplied by -1. So one trick, whenever you see multiplied by -1, you can also think about, well, we can sort of gratuitously multiply this by 1. And now these lines are really structured the same. It's just that these two have a 1 and these two have a -1. So what's the benefit of that? I will show you. So I'm going to copy, I'll go ahead actually and cut this. Maybe I'll do it this way. I'm going to make a function called drawArm1. Take some arguments, which we'll figure out. Format the document. Okay, so what does this thing depend on? It depends on x, depends on y, and depends on radius. Big surprise. So x, y, radius. So that should draw, I don't know which arm that is, the left or the right, one of them. Oops, and I broke something. Oh, x1 is not defined. Right, so we extracted the code that declared the variable or defined it with this let, but left the code that used it again, so we just need to add some lets back. Okay, we're back in business. So now I'll do it this way. I'm going to extract this code to draw the second arm. And I'll make it a separate function. I'm going to go ahead and guess that it takes very similar arguments. Draw arm 2, xy radius. Format the document. And make sure that still works. Okay, but now because I added this ×1 back here, and I said that the only difference between these two chunks of code is that this is ×1 and this is times -1, well, we could make either one of these functions serve in the place of both if we just add an argument, which we'll call s for, let's call it sine. And so I'm going to replace that literal value with a variable that we're going to pass in. And so since I just changed arm1, that's the one I'm going to change. So I'm going to pass in the value that used to be here. So now sine will have the value 1, and so this code should do exactly the same thing. But now I can say, well, the draw arm 2 was doing exactly the same thing as draw arm 1, just with -1. So if I pass -1 to the draw arm 1 function, it should still do the same thing. I don't need this function anymore, and I can rename this to just draw arm. And now draw arms just draws an arm, draws another arm in the other direction. Okay, and that's almost it. I guess we haven't looked at draw but. So what does it do? It gets a radius, it draws a black circle, and then it draws a filled white circle, which is like the snowball here. And we have that same code actually in all of these. Draw torso has that same thing, and draw head presumably, right, has the same thing. So why don't we go, like those are all almost probably exactly the same. We get the radius, and then we draw a circle with x and y with the radius plus 2 and the radius. Is that? Yep. So it's like the same pattern. So let's call that draw snowball, x, y, and it takes the size because it computes the radius. Oh, actually, take that back. Since we use the radius everywhere else, we need to define it, leave the definition here, radius, and that kind of makes sense. That draw snowball also takes an x and a y and a radius and does its thing. So we've just replaced the 1 in draw head, but it still draws a snowball. And now we can go to draw torso and x, y, radius. And we can just copy that line. And now draw butt is so simple that like all it really does is draw the snowball, which makes sense because that's all it is a big snowball. But I feel okay with actually having it be a separate function because then it's clear in draw snowman that it draws these three parts, the head, the torso, and the butt. And if we decided for some reason we wanted the bottom part of the snowman to be decorated in some way, like we would know what function to go change to do that instead of just having draw snowball right here. Okay, and so that cuts things down. Or I don't know, actually doesn't cut things down. Like in terms of lines of code, this is longer, and obviously in terms of number of functions, there are more functions, but each function sort of does one thing. And just to show you the sort of benefit of that is that, and it's maybe not something I've said explicitly, like part of the point of refactoring code and keeping code well factored is because not only does it make it easier to understand, but then makes it also easier to modify in the sense that, like, well, what if we wanted to draw a slightly different picture? Actually, in order to do that, I got to change one thing. So to draw the snowman, this draw snowman function is hardwired to always draw the snowman at the X position in the middle of the screen. But what if I wanted to change that? So this is another maneuver where this X is computed from the width. What if we made that an argument? And then put the same expression there. And now actually, and when we do that, the editor helps us out and says, well, you know what, width isn't even used anymore. So that means we can take that argument out, which is cool because this makes sense. To draw the snowman, we don't need to know how wide the thing is. We just need to know where to put it. So this is actually, I would say, an improvement in that the snowman shouldn't have to care about the width of the screen. It just needs to know where in the screen to be positioned. So this should still work. Okay, but that means, what if we wanted to slide the guy over a little bit? Just change that one argument and it moves. But now, because we have a function that draws just the snowman without drawing the background, we can draw the background once and the snowman twice at two different positions. And now we have two snowmen in our drawing. And everything else works great because everything that got passed into the snowman was a function of, or was the, everything it depends on is passed into it. So, and everything that it passes stuff down to the subfunctions that draw the different parts of the snowman. So they all get, everything gets drawn in the right place. We could also make the second snowman smaller. So, I don't know, size came in to draw a picture. We could make a second snowman that's like 80% of the size of the other one. We could shift its base back. So it's like a little kid snowman. Or maybe it's a snowman in perspective. It's not quite enough. 120. Oops. Floating snowman, right? All kinds of things we can do. So that's maybe a little better example of why it's worthwhile to extract these functions. Before we just had one function that did everything, and that meant if we wanted to do one part of it more than once or in a different way, we couldn't. So we had to at least extract draw snowman. The other extractions here for drawing the different parts, unless we want to make a two-headed snowman or something, maybe not useful for this reason, but it is also still, I would argue, a lot easier to understand. It's easier to look at any one of these functions and say, does it do the right thing? And if we wanted to change some part of it, it was like, oh, these arms are kind of straight, and usually snowman arms are sticks, and they should be a little crooked. And so I just want to change how they get drawn, maybe make it a little bit random, or maybe just put an angle in it. I know exactly where I need to go. I need to go to this one function and change how it operates. And if I really wanted to, I could have two functions, one that draws straight arms and one that draws crooked arms, and then draw arms could take an argument that says which one to use. Something like that. So there's a lot of reasons to break code down into smaller pieces. The pieces are more reusable, they're more understandable. All right, I said I was going to try and keep this one short. We zipped right through that. Hopefully you get a little better sense of just the mechanical movements that you need to make to extract functions. All right. Thanks for watching. Hope this was useful.